Before we get into the workshop, I just want to give you all a little background on who Judy is and why she's here. So Judy Shen-Filerman is the CEO of Dreambridge Partners, which is a cross-cultural leadership coaching firm focused on galvanizing the concepts of best self, belonging, and collaboration to drive organizational innovation and productivity. Judy's mission is to empower leaders of all backgrounds to be their best selves and catalyze organization leaders to create diverse, inclusive, and equitable ecosystems where all employees can thrive. Judy's internal struggles with identity and belonging during her life phases as a child immigrant, student, and executive in living the American dream have deeply informed the mission of her firm. She's passionate about helping culture crossers, women, people of color, first-gen and global professionals, express their best self to achieve their highest potential. And she also engages organizations to develop inclusive and equitable practices in their leaders, managers, and the broader talent management system. Whether coaching executives on demanding growth trajectories or facilitating diversity, equity, and inclusion discussions in corporate and higher ed institutions, Judy brings her passion and authenticity to engage and empower others. An accomplished leader, Judy led innovative businesses at Procter & Gamble, Campbell Soup Asia, and Polaroid. As the youngest executive at Polaroid, leading a $500 million product portfolio, she catapulted Polaroid into its first ever e-commerce business. A Harvard College and Harvard Business School graduate, Judy now leverages her experiential knowledge as a successful cross-cultural leader to inspire individuals and galvanize organizations to achieve their dreams. I've had the privilege of attending one of Judy's workshops last summer, and I cannot speak enough about how inspiring she is and how real and relevant her advice is to the needs and aspirations of anyone, but especially those holding a minority identity. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Judy Shen-Filerman, and let's get this session started.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for having me, and Jesse and others who have organized today's session. It's so good to be here. Just so you know, I've actually, Jesse and Cynthia, there's a handout I wanted to give to everybody, but for some reason I can't upload it to chat. So I've just emailed it to you. If you can upload it for everyone, that would be fabulous. So I just came in towards the latter part of the, before you went on a break, and I thought, oh my gosh, there was some really great conversation that was happening. So hopefully we'll keep it as real as what I was hearing was happening before. And really hone in on this notion of cross-cultural success. All right, let me just make sure. Every once in a while, I click so quickly, I just make sure I'm clicking the right. There we go. Okay, make sure it is the right one. All right, so as Cynthia was saying, so much of the work that I do really is about what does it mean to be our best selves. And I really believe that the best self should be a human right that all of us get to live. But right now, it's still one of privilege, right? And so, and for all of us that have been through business school, we understand it's a real gateway to major opportunities. But what I found in the career that I have had going, getting into corporate executive levels, and then now as I do a lot of executive and leadership development and coaching, is that many of us still really don't know the full aspect of what the game really is, right? So I think it's really, really important for us to understand what that is. And I want to make sure that I'm really helping you figure out what that GPS is so that we don't have to figure it out while we're in the game. All right. So one of the key things that I talk about is the importance of story, knowing who we are, owning our history, owning our journeys, and really stepping out into that ownership of our best selves. And that's really how we're able to really shine and achieve what it is that we're all meant to do in our highest potential. So I'm just going to go a quick thing about my own story. And, so there's always a resume version and then there's a real version, right? So I'll give you a bit of the real version versus the resume version of me. Cynthia said, I'm an immigrant, came to the States when I was 6. My parents basically were refugees from China when the communists took over, and I grew up in New York City. So my entire life started in the US with diversity. My first friends were Blacks and Latinx friends. And again, at that point, we didn't have media going out into the world. And so these were my friends. I had no preconceived notions of people or what America was like at that point. And then when we moved later on to another neighborhood in New York, I was largely Jewish. So until I went to Harvard, I thought that was really what America was. And so you can imagine it was a pretty big shock when I got to Harvard undergrad. And it was the first time in my life, as much as I loved it and I learned a lot, but it was also the first time that I realized that because of my package, I didn't get invited to certain places, the frats or the finals clubs that were there. Because I didn't date anybody. So you can come in as long as you come through the back door. And it was like, wow, right? Nonetheless, I think both of those schools gave me what I consider really good finishing school lessons about how to make it in corporate America, all the social elements that are critical for development over time and advancement. And then the first part of my career was in consumer packaged goods. So Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati, mass marketing in the detergents division, and worked on Tide. And then Campbell Soup after B school was largely out in Asia and developed an Asia strategy. Then I did startup. I was, I don't know, it wasn't in back then, but I became a personal trainer, started a fitness center. And then eventually went back to corporate at Polaroid, where I did run their North America professional and business division, and really learned what it was like to get to senior positions there. I was reporting to a person that was one level below the CEO. So saw a lot of the political action that was going on. But I think from the outside, it looks like it's a pretty cool deal, right? In terms of what I did and my age, my early 30s, became a VP. But at 32, I was infertile, couldn't have kids, and the specialist couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. I finally went to see an acupuncturist, and she said to me, "This is really interesting. I've never seen anybody." So let me step back. So in acupuncture, there is female energy and male energy, and so what she said is, "I have never met anyone that does not have any yin, female energy." And I apparently didn't. So I had actually done a really, really good job becoming a white guy, to the point that I actually didn't even have that female energy. And from her perspective, there's no way you could ever get pregnant, given how your system is right now. Made a big, big decision that I thought I would never make as an immigrant, stepped off to try to have kids. And once my baby came, I had to really reevaluate my love for global travel and global business, and the responsibility of bringing a child into the world. So I was lucky enough to take some time off, and then started my own firm, Dreambridge Partners, which is more about it finding me than me finding it, which is a whole other story for another time that I will not go in today. But I want to be really honest about this, right? Because you look at the resume, and we all oftentimes look at the resume, but there's always a real story behind that. And that's both my loss and my gain, because the great thing is I'm actually doing the job and the work that I'm meant to do. It's really the calling. So sometimes you get, sidetracked, so to speak, or off the track, but perhaps that's a track you're really meant to be on, right? And that's really one to let you know about is you're going to plan your career, you're going to think about things, and you never know which things that you think are really not gifts end up being a gift for your life. So hopefully mine is just an example of that. So in both my own journey and now working with so many executives and high potential leaders, there are three key things that I think is really, really important when I think about this notion of interconnected agility, right? Our ability to move in a real facile perspective, globally and diverse across functions, across business industries, all these different things. But it's the notion of interconnection. We've got more, machine learning, AI, whatever we want to talk about this. But at the end of the day, we are still human beings, and we still need that connection. If anything COVID has taught us is that people are still so important for us. So there are three key elements that drive the work that I do that I think is really, really important to personal success and career success. One is we've got to know our best self. What does that mean, especially as professionals of color? If we don't own it, no one's going to give it to us. So we got to keep on going for that. Second is belonging is basically like food and water. So find an organization where they really welcome you. They want you to be there. And if you're smelling anything other than that, get the hell out of there, right? And three is finally this notion of culture. Culture is just simply a point of view from people in power in a particular geography that have created a concept of what are appropriate and inappropriate behaviors. There's no good, there's no bad, there's no right, there's no wrong. It's just certain people of power decided this is what a culture is going to be. So when we think about corporate power, we've got to really understand who created that culture and how do we begin to fit into that. And I'll talk about that a little more. So those three elements really are the undergirding of the work that I do. So kind of quick 4 ideas for you to really think about as you are in B school, thinking about the next phase of your life. 4 elements that I think are absolutely musts for all of us. One is, as I said before, you've got to know and own your superpower. Again, every single one of us has that. And especially for those of us that have come from immigrant backgrounds, challenging upbringing, we are usually taught to shame that and to not really embrace and love and nurture it. And yet it's really the core of what drives us. And that's what I consider our superpower. The second part of this is, and know that career advancement is a game. Any of you that think it's a meritocracy, maybe the first 3 years or so, and then especially after first level of manager, it's a game. So just figure out how to play it. The next thing is, we are never going to be in this moment, right? I would love this to happen before I leave this earth, to be the strong, dominant power in corporate culture. Right now, 429 out of the 500 Fortune 500 CEOs are white male. I graduated business school 25 years ago. All right, so it's moving a lot slower than I thought it would. But so we're going to have to flex, right? But if we flex with a strong core, what that says is I can accommodate other identities, I can accommodate other parts of the world, but I always know who I am. I treasure that, I hold that clear, but I'm actually agile at the same time, right? So when I'm talking about giving up, I'm talking about expanding what it means to be me. I'll talk about that a little more. And then finally is play with others to win. It's the only way. I hope that we'll focus more on collaborating than competing, which is really the major way that we look at business today. And especially as professionals of color, we really need networks. We need supporters. We need sponsors and mentors. So don't go it alone, because you'll never get as far as you could if you're doing it with other people. Right. So 4 key things for you to think about. So what is this thing that I'm talking about in terms of this notion of your superpower? What does it mean to engage and build on that? Let me kind of get into that a little bit more here. First is, I hope all of you are really thinking about, what's my vision? Not what somebody else thinks my vision should be. As an Asian person, not what my parents thought that it should be. But as I'm going into my life in my 20s and my 30s, what is my vision and what am I thinking about for the 3, 5, 10 years that's ahead? And know that's going to shift. It's going to change. Plans are made so that it's going to change, but at least have what I call the horizon of where it is that you want to go. And then importantly, when you're in business school, be a consumer of business school, right? You're not lucky that you're there. They're lucky to have you. Just make sure you're thinking with that mindset. And therefore, I want you to think about, how does business school serve your objectives? You're a consumer. They are giving you services. How are you going to utilize UCLA in a way that's going to serve your purposes? And therefore, what are your priorities? Not following the herd, not following what everybody else is doing. You got to figure out what it is that you want. Leaders are not usually in the middle or in the back. Leaders in the front, and pioneering is usually a lonely job. So if you really want to be a leader, you've got to be okay with not always belonging or fitting in, right? Really hard in B school. Trust me, I understand what that was like. All right. The other part is if we want to really excel in our industries, it is so important that we're doing the stuff that we really, really love, and you're figuring out, what is that fingerprint of mine? What is it that's uniquely mine? And I think we have to make some mistakes. We have to hit some walls before we figure out, wow, this is really my thing. But I love Tim Butler. He's a psychologist at HBS and runs their coaching program. He was there when I was actually a student. And he talks about this notion of deep interest structures, that each one of us has this potential self that was almost seeded when we're kids. And we felt, especially when we're about 10 years old. And what he says is here, deep structure interests are one of the most basic features of an individual's personality. They're deeply rooted and enduring. And they naturally push us to find an avenue for their expression, just as an underground pool of geothermally heated water pushes its way to the surface. Like, it just needs to come out, right? Work that is not grounded in an individual's unique pattern of deep structured interest will not sustain a career over a lifetime. Let me define what that means. Of course, it'll sustain you, right? My father gave up his career, came here, did something completely different. He sustained us. but I don't think his passion was ever sustained. So the question is, if you want to have passion in your career, that kind of sustenance really does take kind of focus for you to have that and then have that build over life, right? So this part of the superpower has a few elements to that. One of them is knowing what your career asset value is. Many of us think about, oh, I can do this, I've got these strengths, I've got these experiences, I've been in these industries. Those are things that you have done. That doesn't tell me what your value really is. And so my point here is begin to curate very, very consciously the various parts of your life and your experiences plus your education that makes you an asset, because an asset has inherent value and continues to create value, and organizations pay for assets. They don't just pay for skills. And that's a real mindset change that I hope that if you're not thinking this way, to really kind of begin to build that into your system. What does that mean? So gold, of course, has inherent value, right? So even if it's in its ore, it's still gold. But the moment you make it into coins, the moment that you make it into a bracelet, we actually have a market value to that particular gold that always had value anyway. So you're going to be out there into the market. How do you make yourself marketable? It's something you have to really, really think about. And one of the key things I work with my coaching clients is, where are you adding value to your employer, and how are you making sure that they understand how you're making value? And importantly, to know that this value is so high, it's perishable. You don't get me what I want, I'm a high performer for you. At some point, I may just leave, right? And one of the key reasons I got to be the youngest VP is they knew that if I didn't get what I wanted because I was performing like heck for them, that I was perishable. I would go somewhere else. And that always served me very well, right? A little hint there. So as I said, as for example, as an Asian person coming through America, I was, at that point, really, it was kind of feeling ashamed to be Asian, the whole Chinese thing. We spoke Chinese at home. I didn't know all the ins and outs. And Harvard really made it feel like if you weren't basically upper class white, you didn't quite belong there, right? And so I think it's been years of unpeeling that back and being actually proud of everything that I am. It probably wasn't until my late 20s, even early 30s, that I was like, wow, I'm really going to own this because this is my journey. And so I think it's important for all of you to understand what exactly it is that your journey has been. And some of the worst things that have happened in your life is actually what makes you absolutely the superpower platinum gold that you are. Society will usually tell us that we're not enough. And it's going to be up to us to actually shift that narrative to say that which I have not been seen is actually that which has always given me power. And when we can hold on to that and recognize that, that is when we really have that superpower that just is like, it's like high octane, right? Just going. And we need to really find that. And we also know as people of color that those are challenges in our society. I don't need to say much about this at all. We have seen this in plain sight very, very vividly last couple of years here. So I invite all of you to really treasure, go back, talk to your parents, ask about their histories, and we begin to understand how rich it is, the heritage from which we all come. Right. So when you start to say, okay, I'm getting what my superpower is, I understand my history, I get my career, I get all the stuff that I've done, I'm going to curate that. So I'm going to have some asset value. They're going to go out in the market and go make it work for you. Right. And we also know that given the way the world is, there is bias, there is an unconscious bias, or all the challenges that still is unfortunately part of our society. So the question is, how do you want to play this game, right? And be really mindful of that. So some of the things for you to think about is going to take a look at this chart, which is this. In our first parts of our career, as many of you know, prior to B school, we were rewarded based on what we could do, the reports, the analytics, all the stuff that we could do, and people could see the work was how we actually got our creds, right? But what you see, and what I see, especially when I work with executives, is that if you want to move up in the organization or anywhere it is, and you're looking at the pyramid, right? We can always go this way. I'm not saying that we have to all go in a pyramid, but if you're in B school, this is probably shape you're going for, right? And so if that's what you want to do, what you have to realize is that you've got to shift in your career in terms of what you're focusing on. Yep, we got to nail it. I guarantee if you're not at 8, 9, or 10 out of a ranking of 1 to 10, we're probably not going to make it. We're probably not going to be on a succession plan, right? So you got to nail the work. At the same time, as you move up into organizations, the percent of your time effort that you're seeing here starts to go from doing the work to influencing ideas, having a point of view, creating relationships, the relationships that will get you the next idea, the next project, the next promotion. And for those of us that are constantly working on the meritocratic side of the equation, it's a losing game. So I want you all to really understand that. Now, easy to say, right? But the influence part is equally challenging because we tend not to come from the historical power culture insiders. So we got to figure out how to maneuver into that. But you need to at least know that just doing the work is never going to be enough. You've got to be out there selling, influencing, getting those projects that's going to get you the visibility. And I'll talk about that a little more. But importantly, where we tend to look for the future leaders is that project manager right in the middle. And the reason is the first time you're going to be managing people, but you have no authority. So people get to see what's your capacity for influencing others. And that's a first sign of whether or not you have leadership capacity. Okay. So start thinking about what roles you've had, but that flat relational leadership is usually the vanguard of what's to come. All right. So Cynthia knows I call it for what it is, and here we go, right? Which is, you can look at this and go, oh, whatever expletive you want to use, right? Because this is not a happy story, but we can always make it, we can always break through, and the numbers are getting better. But if once you know the game, you're going to play it better, right? And that's why I'm here. What we do see here is that the blue bars are Caucasians, red, Asian, green, African-American, and purple is Hispanic, as it's written in the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Census, Latinx. And so you can begin to see this. You go from general work to professional to management to Fortune 500 CEO. All the other colors really get smaller to almost like minuscule, non-existent, and the blue keeps on getting bigger. The takeaway I want you to have here is not to think, forget this, man, I'm not going to even have a chance. That's not the point. The point here is that, for example, if I'm Asian and I'm red, I got to know how to be purple. If I don't know how to be purple and I can't play in the blue world, I'm just not going to be seen by the blue world. So the question for you is, what are you going to do so that you keep who you are? I didn't become blue. I'm just purple. I'm more red sometimes. I'm a little more blue other times, but within me, I'm a purple, right? Because I have all those identities. But remember, power has to see itself. So somehow you have to show up in a way that power that happens to be blue is going to see you and be comfortable. I hear people pushing back and saying, when is it going to be our time? I'm like, people, I'm working what I can in corporate right now, but it's kind of a slow moving vehicle, right? So until that time, let's go and figure that out. Let's move in. And I think it's our responsibilities, for example, my generation, that as a person of color, as a woman of color, now that I'm in, I make sure, and I did, even when I was younger in my 30s, that I had a very, very diverse mindset when I was recruiting, whom I was going to promote. And that's our responsibility once we get into these positions, right? That's how we're going to change what these bars are going to look like. So my point here to you is understand how the blue culture works and the fact that you can be in there without losing who you actually are. I know that some of you are like, yeah, right, but we'll talk about that. So the question here is, because of time, I'm not going to actually necessarily open it up, but I do want you to think about, as a person of color in your life so far, what has most challenged your ability to live your best self? If you want to put it into chat, I would love it, because I just want to see some of the answers that you have here. I'm going ahead a little too far, but if you can, I would love for you to say, when you think about your life so far, when you think about being in B school, what are you seeing as potentially the biggest challenge to you living your real best, biggest free self, right? Because if you can name it, you can also shift it, right? And so I'm also asking you to think about what that is. All right. So, yeah, thank you, Cynthia. Camilo, balancing money and passions. Yeah, that could be like couple hours conversation right there, Camilo, but we won't go there either right now today. But again, just think about this. I think it's important for you to name where the challenges are, right? For me, as an Asian chick, people always underestimated the fact that I could be a really strong leader, but they didn't know that I had this engine. They don't know that I grew up in New York City, and I have no problem as a woman dropping the F-bomb. And doing all those things actually gave me a real advantage because they're like, oh, there's a cute little chick coming in. And then I'm like, yeah, mm-hmm. And then I would, shake their hands, and you could just see the guys just like almost stiffening up because they just didn't expect it. So understand, what people are thinking about you. And then, as they say in martial arts, you don't need to fight hard. Just when they're leaning in, you just move out of their way or let them fall so you can still keep standing. Right? And understand how to play that game so you're not overusing your energy unnecessarily. So in terms of the career advancement GPS, what I call the game, there's this concept of third culture leaders that I know when Cynthia was in that session, she was like, that's really cool. And I'll talk about that a little more. But let me first kind of give you the framework of what the game looks like and how that could be played, right, in a more specific way, which is this. Is that there are 4 key things I want each of you to really, really think about and think about, have I been moving in this direction? Am I really thinking about these 4 pillars as I'm looking at developing my career? One is credibility. It's that career asset value. It's always making sure that you know what it is you are doing to build your credibility, that you're getting on the right projects with the right managers, with the right company that's going to allow you to really, really shine, right? And know that unless we're like 8, 9s, and 10s in an organization, I know it's so unfair. One day we will not have to be the outliers in order to kind of get what we deserve. But right now we still have to be on the high performing side to be part of that succession planning, right? So that is your credibility. And the number one thing that I hear from professionals is professional of color about their credibility is that they're not getting the opportunities that they should get. So you got to keep on going for it, nailing it, and making sure that you're getting the right projects that's going to let you shine. The second one is visibility. So we have to prove our value add, right? We can't just do the work. And so being out there, someone says, anyone do the presentation? Yep, I will. And put your hand up, even though you're nauseous. Put your hand up, even though you don't think you're ready. Okay. It's the only way we're going to make it out there. And so then just like prep like crazy, get everyone you can to help you so that when you're there in the time when you're some leader 2, 3 levels above you gets to sit in that meeting and say, oh my gosh, right? Jessica, Sherry, Gautam, you guys, wow, amazing. You just need to have that moment because when they see you, when you have that visibility is when those relationships happen, right? My sponsor showed up because I was truly social. I love putting together events for the company. Didn't realize that would help me, right? But guess what? Senior leaders like, who's that woman? Who's that Asian woman that's doing all these social events? And then, anyway, I would be out there kind of doing presentations, and all of a sudden, even though I didn't go to business school yet, I got chosen to be on Tide detergent, the biggest brand at P&G at that time, right? And it's because the category manager happened to have seen me. And to be really frank, I work out. So I was like on the elliptical, and one day he came up next to me and the Asian person in me was like, oh my God, can I just go? I literally, I was like, how do I get out of here? And then I was like, shit, I'm not going to okay, all right, I'll just stay here. And then there's a part of me that's also always been a bit, I think, on the courageous side. And I said, listen to myself, I've been seeing this issue on this dash brand that I'm on. AG's here. He's trying to have a conversation with me. I'm also just telling him what I think, right? So I just told him, I was like, AG, there's whatever's going on. And he said, why don't you come to my office and have a meeting? And my manager's like, you did what? Right? But the great thing was we had a great presentation and AG knew that I existed, right? So sometimes you have these moments where you have an opportunity to shine, to make that relationship happen. And I say, jump in that, make it happen, because it's sometimes serendipity shows up and you just have to take advantage of that. So that's something I want you to really start to think about too. And then finally is we talk about branding. We talk about, having a great reputation. I guarantee if you start saying, I know who I am, I know what my power is, I don't have to aggress into it. I am who I am. I am comfortable in that. And I will show everyone and let my light shine. Your brand will naturally follow you and it'll show up. You already have a brand. The question is, do you know what the brand is, right? That's the thing that I always talk to people about. Like, oh, I want to have this brand. I want to have that brand. It's like, great, but what's your current brand? And then you can shift towards a brand that maybe you're not yet, right? So 4 things: credibility, visibility, relationships, define and own your superpower so you can have a really, really great brand, are things for you to think about. Now, the next part of it, which is then how do we maneuver within the system, the power system, so that these 4 things can really work for us in our careers. And that's really where this notion of third culture leaders really begin to come through. Right. Just some reason I lost. Okay. So this concept, I'm going to try to distill this very quickly, is this: every single country in the world has a history of power. There's a demography of power. There's a certain kind of people that have always been in power in that particular country. And it usually does not change. Hundreds of years, thousands of years, however you want to call it. In the United States, demography of power are people like right here in Boston, right? European American, white, male, Christian, wealthy. When you begin to understand demography of power, you begin to understand why people play golf, why you have to do wine, why you have to learn how to eat outside in, why there are these darn cocktails and shaking hands and having conversations, because that's what they've done in Britain. They've always done it. And that British notion of social, politeness and capability and elitism literally came to US shores. And that is still where corporate leadership looks at. And that's why when Europeans come over, especially European men, they seem to fit in right, because it's actually that particular culture that we still look as our high-end culture, and that's our corporate culture. And so first of all, you have to understand that, and therefore why white males still are the dominant power, because it's just comfortable. It's something they've known, and that's what power keeps on seeing itself. So all of us who are not any of that are considered power culture outsiders. And we have to find our ways to get in. And sometimes you're in there and you're not really a member, you're kind of a guest. At what point do we get, membership? So there are all these elements. So right now we're the ones that still have to shift ourselves in our cultural norms so that we can actually fit in to the power dynamics that's out there, right? I go to Asia and I guarantee you I don't talk like this because my own culture, for its own misogyny, tells the Asian woman shouldn't be talking so directly the way I am, right? But I learned the American way in corporate, and so I come to you with that perspective. The third culture identity is something that I've actually created, I think is unique, comes out of third culture kids, which is a different kind of a thing. So that the way that I think we stay in our power and the fact that we can play this game is to actually hold this thing called third culture. And what that means is my first language was Chinese. My first culture is Chinese. And that's still, when I go to China or Taiwan or Singapore, people still think I'm Chinese because I'm fluent. But I can show different versions of myself depending on where I happen to be. And all of you have done this. The difference between what I'm talking about, code switching, is I'm not saying just changing it to fit the environment. I'm literally saying, make sure that you can own these identities, because power identity, like it or not, is white male power. So as long as you don't take it as part of you, you're always going to feel like you've been co-opted, you're giving up something there. And my whole point is, I am that power. I am that identity. I happen to be in this body, but I can also take on drinking wine, going to a resort, skiing at a resort, all those things. That's fine. I'll take all that too. So you have to start drinking that in and saying, that is me too, right? And so that's an important thing that as I've been working with professionals of color, they're like, I don't do that. And it's like, why don't you do that? Like, why don't you do that? Yeah, because it's white people do that. It's like, well, no, power people do that. They happen to be white. The question is, do you want to be in that power place or not? We can always make choices, but power will always have summer vacations. They'll always be going to resorts. They'll always be drinking wine. They'll always be going to fancy restaurants, eating outside in, right? There's always going to be tennis. There's always going to be golf. We can choose what we want to partake in, but you have to understand that power is that, and power is that around the world, by the way. Go to China, go to Korea, go to India, it's basically the same thing. Somehow we transported that into a world basis. which has to do with some kind of global dominations happened in the last 500 years, but I won't go there either. Okay, so what does it mean in terms of how do we stay whole in ourselves as we're shifting into this? And this is practice, right? I can tell you this, but you're going to have to do it for you to figure out what your version is. And the reality is, let me just go into what this is. I'll give you an example. So when I was at home, spoke Chinese, acted with so much respect for my parents, and not just act, that's the way I was. Moment came out of the door, closed the door, and my friends were American, right? Not Chinese. I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. You're kidding. Oh my God, that's so good, right? Now, inside and outside that door, they're both me, but I just had a different version of myself depending on where I was, right? And then my community, I would shift depending on whether it was Chinese community or the fact that I was in a larger white community. And then education, right? People thought a certain thing about me because I happened to have this package. And the career, I just mentioned the things that happened. So as we move through these different elements, we have versions of ourselves, we have versions that shift. And then when I went back home, I wasn't Chinese enough either, right? So the third culture part of it is this. Our power comes from the fact that we can have multiple identities. We've only been told that you're this and you're that. My kids are triracial. They've got no issues being Chinese, Black, and white Jewish, right? I happen to have a social experiment. They literally can move between all three. They speak Chinese. They're all okay. So I know for sure that it's just the mindset, right? And so the question for you is, how do you begin to shift in these identities and have that ownership that all of these are part of me, and I choose what version of me I'm going to show you today. That's not being co-opted. That's not being confused. That's having ownership that we have multiple ways of being. Any of you that tell me that with your best friends that you partied, that you were the exact same person that showed up in front of your grandmother or your mother, you know you're lying, right? So you all know that you've already had different identities growing up. I'm just saying add another version of a different identity into who you are. And forget about what society is telling you, because it's a lot of crap, right? So own that. And when you can own that, then you can go out there and be whatever version you want, because it's always in you. But when you make that choice, as I have, what I also know is I belong nowhere. But I belong with myself. I belong with people that are multiple identities. I love hanging with international folks, people I've been around different places, because this notion of belonging is I belong with myself. I have people that have had common journeys with whom I belong, but I no longer belong fully with the Chinese. I'm definitely not white. I mean, you know, I'm not Black or Hispanic, but I'm okay in that, because living in the middle is why I can do the work I do in cross-cultural work and DEI, because I can really see so many different perspectives, and I love doing that. But I've had to have periods where I was in identity confusion, right? Trying to figure out what version was I going to be really happiest with. And now in my mid 50s, I'm like, oh, they're all mine, and I love it, and it's great, right? So for those of you, as they say, in your 20s or early 30s, it is still identity in formation. And I think it's a great time for you to start thinking, what does identity really mean? And who told me what my identity was? We now all know that this whole thing of identity is a social construct. So construct your own. Forget about what people are telling you. You own that identity, and no one has to tell you what it's supposed to be, right? Okay, so our flexibility to move is going to be a key thing here. Now, Cynthia, I just dumped a whole lot on all of you in a very short amount of time, but I know that it's one of those things, it's going to be in your head, and some of you are either I don't know what she's talking about. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, which is okay too, because I'm always open to challenges about is this concept really workable? I believe it is. And others, it's going to take a little while for us. It goes through your head. Eventually, it's going to sit in your body, I hope. But I do want you to process this a little bit and not have me be a talking head. So what I would love for you to do is actually go into the breakout and download the handout, because in the handout are these frameworks that I just shared with you. And I do want you to talk to your classmates and your colleagues about a couple of these things, just to start to process this a little bit. Is which aspect of the career advancement GPS and third cultural leader frameworks resonate most with you, and why? Which part is really resonating with you? And then of those four pillars, the credibility, the visibility, the relationship, and the superpower kind of reputation brand part. If while you're in B school or wherever you're going to head next, if you're graduating soon, is what's that one pillar you want to really make sure you're going to work on as a priority, right? We want to work on all four, but there may be for us sometimes the key thing that we know kind of is gnarling at us, the one that we want to work on. I want to make sure that we give you that opportunity to do so. All right. What I'm going to do is have you go into the breakouts. I'm dying to hear from you, but I know that once I start talking to you, you're going to lose our breakout opportunity because I love hearing from the audience. So why don't we do 10 minutes and then we'll have you come back and would love to have more conversation with all of you. So it's going to be, I think, 3 or 4 persons in the group. Make sure that everyone gets a headline, especially the introverts. Make sure we're including the introverts. They are really great listeners. I want you to talk. All right. Okay. So whoever is our breakout room wizard, if you could get them in their rooms, that would be great. Enjoy. So I had a great opportunity to be with one of the small groups and kind of hearing some perspectives there. We have some minutes left. Love to get your questions, your thoughts. I'm going to try to be efficient in my responses. Any questions? What was catalyzed? Hey there, Lisa? Liza,
yeah. Hi, it's okay. My name's Liza Katzman. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a 2020 FEMBA. Oh gosh, I feel like I'm on like the stage now and I look terrible. So my question for you, Judy, is, so I actually, I'm a DI practitioner, I'm a DI consultant, that's what I do. There's a big theme and a movement and a sentiment right now, especially in the space that I work in, which really is trying to celebrate and shift the definition of power and power structure. And there's a lot of, when I work with clients, when I work with leaders, my job is to help them see and understand and redefine what they define as leadership and what they define as power. And I'm curious, based on your framework and some of the things that you mentioned towards the end, you talked about how, people, in order to kind of climb and succeed, perhaps have to adjust and switch and perhaps understand power and be able to shift their behaviors in a way to make those in power comfortable. However, do you believe that there is also a possibility of shifting the framework and shifting the perspective in that perhaps making a large community and portion of people, making those in power uncomfortable, and really shifting their perspectives around the definitions of what it means to be the culture that is defined in power?
Yeah, so I think that the question here is not if, but when. So there's no question the work that I do is always, I'm talking to CEOs, I'm in C-suites, I'm in there, trust me, changing on their perspectives. But I also know when you get out of B school right now, that hasn't changed. So my job is to say, I want at least for you to know what the game is. And while you're in the game, change the game. But I am seeing so many people who are not making it to executives because they just don't know how to play the game. And if you think you're going to sit there and just do the work and they're going to say, yeah, sure, come on, because your work is really good, we'll see you now. It's not working. Look at the numbers. So I am wholeheartedly about changing that paradigm. I am working like crazy in companies and creating accountabilities and promotion rates and equity in advancement, equity in recruiting. And I can't tell you, yes, there are CEOs that want to do it. I'm working with a 40,000 person company right now, trying to move it. And I guarantee you, they are making it change, but their next succession plan in the next 3 to 5 years is not going to change who's going to be at the C-suite, not significantly. And I want you guys to at least know what the game is and change the game while you're at it. Right? It's just that in my executive coaching, there's so many people that have not been told how it is. I always say my job is to show you how the game is being played, and you can choose how you want to play it. But I do think that and there's some great CEOs right now that are really, really looking to change the game. They really are. And I also know it's going to be a bit of time before we get there. So it's a both and, right? It's not either or, it's both and. How do we do the both and? It's a great point. We have to challenge the system. There's no question. We have to challenge the system. Yeah, great question. Hard one.
Yeah, I mean, could I ask like a really, go ahead. It's fine.
We should probably move to somebody else. Yeah. Great question. Oh, I wish it could be different sooner. All right. Any others? Perspectives?
Nicole Gabriel has her hand raised.
Oh, sorry. I always say people just talk. I'm in. Just come on in. All right. Hey there. Good to see you again.
Yes. Thank you so much for both joining my group in the breakout room and giving this chat. And I don't know if this was something that came up earlier, but when you kind of look back at your career journey and your MBA experience, what is something that you wish you would have done differently? And why?
Great question. I would say that I would have wished that I would have known that I was enough, and that I was going to go out to the places where I was really curious, rather than wondering if I belong there. And to also be okay that I'm going to face places and people that are third generation Harvard Business School people are going to look at me and go, "You don't belong." And I said, "Well, I'm going to show up, depending on what my objectives are, because that's how I'm going to get. And at some point, I don't have to love you. I don't have to be friends with you. I just want to make sure I'm in the game with you." And that's the way I look at it. And then so that's a key thing. I think I was just always waiting to say, am I really going to belong? And that kept me from a lot of opportunities, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any more questions, challenges, things that didn't make sense?
Rosa, go for it.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. It's all good. Thank you so much for this. Really appreciated your perspective. One of the things that came up in our group is how much of this work is extremely heavy and emotional labor. And I'm curious about what advice you have for folks who, because this work can lead to a lot of burnout, and how to strategies for sort of preventing that burnout, because we can be so susceptible to it in majority culture settings. Yeah, that's such a great point, right? A few things. One is I think self-care is absolutely important, right? So we do, and I would say especially since you're moving to the more senior levels, and I would say all people do, is how much time they spend on strategizing, how much time they're spending on how to shift to get to a better opportunity position to sell something in, rather than just doing the work. That's just what happens at the executive levels, right? It's all about influence. So it's a very different mindset. Not doing the intellectual work, but doing the influence work is a very different mindset. And then which means social belonging becomes a part of that, right? So a few things. One is, I hope every single one of you know what gives you joy, what gives you rest, and make sure you're making time for that. There's no if, and, or buts. It's gotta happen, right? And two is look for the allies in the organization. They are always there. They are always there. My sponsor that helped me get to the VP level, to be the youngest VP at Polaroid, he was a quiet sponsor. He would talk to me one way when I was in the office with him, and when I was outside the office, he would completely change, like he was just one of the boys. So understand that when sponsors want to help you, they will whisper to you they want to help you. I think nowadays people are like, oh yeah, go get sponsor programs. People usually don't say, I would like to be your sponsor. That may happen, but the ones that I have found to be highly influenceable sponsors
tend to say, I really love your work. That was a great presentation that you did. Tell me a little more about what you did. And that tends to be a signal to you, I'm interested in you. And then it's up to us to follow up and have those conversations, right? So look for those allies, because then you realize you're not alone. One of the most important things is figure out who are my allies across from me, below me, and above me, so that when I am, kind of at a loss, when I'm not sure, when I'm not feeling confident, there's somebody that I can go to. And I think it's really important that we create those networks. And then importantly, we will have moments where we make a mistake. And when we make that mistake, we have enough of the network to support us so we don't fail. Everyone has made mistakes, but if you don't have a network there taking care of you, you're more likely to actually fail out of the organization, right? So I can go on forever. Cynthia, am I running out of time? It's 4:32.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We wanted to say thank you very much, Judy, for your time and for your inspiration, and honestly, for me, it was reframing the way I think about a lot of these issues. And with that, I would love to transition over to, and I love all the virtual rounds of applause. That's amazing. Thank you. I'd love to transition over to our next panel, and I'll be introducing them. So, good afternoon, and thank you all once again for joining us for the first Dialogue on Equity Summit. My name is Camilo. I'm a first year at Anderson. This has been honestly a labor of love, and I want to give a huge shout out to Courtney Chung and Jesse Mesa for running point on this. It's been amazing what they have taken from a kernel of an idea to now fruition. It's incredible to see. So as I mentioned, I'm a first year, born and raised in San Diego, graduated from Claremont McKenna College, and I graduated at the height of the economic crisis, right? And so I struggled to find work, and I had some of kind of like those same qualms and issues as I entered business school in the middle of a pandemic. But it's so amazing to see how we're coming through on the other side of that, right? And I think we're going to see a huge opportunity of growth going forward, and yeah, it's incredibly exciting to be here. And so with that, I'd love to share that our closing keynote today will focus on unpacking identity and the ways in which we can transform our differences into our power. This will be exemplified by our keynote speaker, Dr. John Tracy's inspiring journey. Moderating this keynote, we have Miguel Unzueta, Dean Miguel Unzueta, an award-winning professor of management and operations, who also currently serves as a senior associate dean of all UCLA Anderson's MBA programs. Highly resonant with our summit's themes, his latest research explores the ways in which people and companies define diversity and the impact that these definitions have on representation of women and racial minorities within organizations. Today, we are also honored to have with us Dr. John J. Tracy as our keynote speaker. Tracy served as Senior Vice President of the Boeing Company, the world's largest aerospace company. Tracy is a highly respected and longtime veteran in the aerospace industry with more than 35 years of experience and honors, including an induction to the Hispanic Engineer National Achievement Awards, Corporation Hall of Fame in 2009, among so many others. Tracy's journey, experience, and success as a first-generation college student, former high school educator, and Hispanic American leader in the STEM field exemplify the importance of leveraging your background and identity as a source of inspiration and power. And with that, I hand it over to Dean Miguel Unzueta and Dr. John Tracy. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Camilo, for that introduction. And thanks everybody for taking part in this event. It's truly an honor to be part of the inaugural version of this gathering. It is my pleasure to be moderating a discussion with John Tracy. John is a fascinating individual that we're going to get to know a little bit better for the next 45 minutes or so. I'm coming at you live from El Paso, Texas. John, can I say where you're at? Is that
sure? Go ahead.
Cool? So it's not as good as West Texas, but he is in Hawaii. He's in Hawaii visiting family, I believe. So thank you so much for making the time and for working with time zones and doing this for us.
Great to be here with you, Miguel. Hey, first, I'd like to thank the person that got me here, and that's Chris Lowe, one of the Anderson School students. I remember the first time I saw Chris Lowe he was the point guard in a CIF basketball game, and sitting 3 feet next to me watching the game was Denzel Washington. So I will never forget the first time I saw Chris Lowe. And you'll have to ask him why Denzel Washington was sitting right next to me. But Chris has been a great friend for a long time. I mean, we get together time to time all over the country, actually, just by circumstance. And it's nice to be with him again today, even if only virtually. So with that, back to you, Miguel.
Man, I kind of want to spend 45 minutes talking about Denzel Washington now, to be perfectly honest. All right, John, so you have had a fascinating career. You went from, well, we'll get into your life history, but one thing that I found particularly interesting was that you actually were a high school math and physics teacher. And then from that position, you transitioned into engineering, a doctorate level work in engineering. You eventually rose at Boeing to be the chief technology officer. So why don't we start there? We'll start at your professional background and kind of work our way back into your earlier life. So as a CTO at Boeing, you oversaw some of the biggest and most complex projects that this organization has ever seen. Can you just tell us about some of those? What are your sort of proudest moments, proudest accomplishments as CTO at Boeing?
It was a very exciting time. I was the CTO and I led, at the time, engineering, manufacturing, supplier management, internal R&D. For 10 years straight, I had about 2/3 of the entire company. And every single day, I wasn't sure what I was going to be fired for, but I knew there was something at least that I could be fired for every day. So it didn't matter what the project was. The excitement was just wondering if I'd have a job when I went home, because in my role, I was responsible for everything technical that went on at Boeing, whether it's commercial airplanes, satellites in space, rocket launches, undersea vehicles, no matter what it was, somewhere our products were being used. And if anything went wrong everywhere, the CEO, who wasn't an engineer, expected me to be on top of it all. So for 10, 11 years straight, I lived on the edge of my seat 24 hours a day, just hoping nothing would go wrong. It was very exciting. Now, of course, there were some very exciting projects that people knew about. I was responsible for, after the Challenger accident, assuring that the space shuttle was safe to go into orbit, and I had to sign off on that. We had an airplane called the 787, which was the first use of composite materials, which was my technical specialty in the history of aviation, for a wing and a fuselage. And so that was really the focus of my life work and my research. So when the 787 flew, I was on the runway with 14,000 other people for its first flight, people that had worked on it. And I had tears in my eyes. I was so happy. And many others were like that too. I mean, when the plane left the ground, there were people just screaming and hollering. It was the kind of joy you would imagine if your sports team won the championship, but that you were like part of the team because you made it happen. It's a joy I can't describe when you're part of it. Anyway, so there's been a lot of fun things. I worked on one thing called Clementine I was in charge of, which is the first spacecraft that discovered water ice on the moon. So there've been a lot of things that I worked on that I have good memories for. But the job really all boiled down to people and working with people. And it wasn't about things or machines or computers or big equations. It was about how can you work with people and get them to work together, and how diversity is used to make all that happen.
So that's actually a great transition to my next question. I was going to ask you about leadership style. I'm curious, you just mentioned that you essentially were the technical translator for your CEO, who himself was not an engineer. So I'm just curious if you could tell us a little bit about your own leadership style and maybe the leadership style you've seen in others that maybe works for them, but not you. I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, clearly there's a diversity of leadership styles in big companies, and you've got to pick the one that's yours so that you can go home feeling comfortable at night and you can do something sustainable. There are many ways you can lead. You can lead by yelling at people and giving them orders because something's urgent, and there are things that are urgent that you need to get people to do. But my feeling was that sort of military style leadership, for me personally, was not sustainable over the long run. You know, if you want to have a career out of it, you need to have a more interactive style leadership. So I hated reading business books. I probably shouldn't admit that to this group, but I only read a couple. But there were two principles I got out of them that I used my entire career. One was this concept of servant leadership, you know, where you feel that your job is not to be served by the organization, but that your job is to facilitate the success of everybody that reports to you, and that you aren't the most important person. You're like in a baseball team, the bat boy or the bat girl, whose job is to make sure that the players have the tools they need, to make sure they're not distracted by useless, you know, tasks and assignment. That your job is again to serve them and to make everybody else successful. And the ironic thing is, in doing that, typically if you do it well, you become successful and move up through the organization. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but I really think that worked. The other set of principles that define my leadership style came from a book, the only business book I can remember reading the title and the author of, and that was a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by a guy named Stephen Covey. These principles, I think, are fantastic in helping you figure out how you can have a sustainable leadership career.
All right, so we got a book recommendation, a classic recommendation.
It's an old one, that's for sure.
I remember actually listening to the audio tape version of that when I was in college. So I'm just dating myself. Yeah.
Well, I got to tell you one funny story. I was at McDonnell Douglas, which became part of Boeing, and I was actually teaching the class to Boeing or McDonnell Douglas employees. And the vice president at the time of our group, she happened to be in the class. And one of the principles in the class is that sometimes you need to stop working to, recreate yourself, to reinvigorate yourself. Stop working, and they call it sharpen the saw. And she pulled me aside. You don't work 24 hours a day. You have to stop once in a while so you can, recharge your batteries. She pulled me aside after the class and said, I don't want you teaching that stuff to our employees. I want them working 24 hours a day. Not sustainable, obviously.
Yeah, I was going to say that cannot be the path towards happy long-term employees.
No, absolutely not.
As MBA students, we often tell our students that they need to be able to advocate for themselves and market themselves in order to succeed. However, as students of color, it can also be a little challenging to pull that off. And so we're curious, how have you been able to advocate for yourself throughout your career and get buy-in from your peers? So this whole idea of like marketing yourself, did that play at all into your career?
Yes. I think there's probably more than two kinds of employees. Well, first, let me give a caveat. I'm not an expert in HR. I'm not an expert in diversity. I'm not even going to claim I'm an expert in engineering anymore since I retired 5 years ago. So I'm just giving you my personal opinions, right? And the class obviously can reject the ones that they don't think are appropriate and incorporate the ones who do. I think I think there are two kinds of people. There are people that know exactly where they want to go in their work life, and they come up with a very distinct plan to get that done. Then there are other people that aren't that long-term focused, and they're just trying to focus on doing a good job today. And maybe they think a little bit about the future, but they don't have a specific job in mind. The second, I worked for 2 CEOs at Boeing as my direct supervisor. The second one, from the day he entered the company as an intern, he knew he wanted to be the CEO, and everything he did was focused on making that happen. So he had a very well thought out personal marketing plan to make sure he would achieve that goal. And I think that's fine because that's what he wanted to do. He had a way to do it. There are other people like me that didn't have that kind of long-term career objective. And we were just trying to, people like me, we just wanted to do a good job every day. We weren't sure we were even going to be successful in the job we had, because, hey, I'm not qualified to do this. I just got to figure out how to make it through the day. So there are people like me that weren't trying to market themselves for future things. We were just trying to do a good job today. And ironically enough, for me at least, if you focus on trying to do a good job today and you market yourself based on your expertise, like when people, I wanted when people saw me to think, there goes John, he's an expert in composite materials and structures. If I've got a problem in that area, he's the guy I want on my team. So I worked hard to create that image by working hard to be an expert in composite materials and share my knowledge in places where I thought it would make a difference. Not so much at the time we didn't have, Twitter and LinkedIn and all that to put posts out or anything like that. It was just, hey, I got to be great at this. I got to study harder. I got to learn everything there is to know. And then I got to use that knowledge. So when they see me, they identify me with greatness in that area.
Yeah. For those of you that are in your 20s, we used to actually hang our resumes, paper printouts around our necks to, that was our version of LinkedIn. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. But I like what you're saying. I mean, it sounds like your own, if you even want to call it a personal marketing strategy, it was simply to demonstrate expertise in a specific subset of knowledge in your field.
Yeah, and my feeling was that if expertise wasn't valued by the company I was working for, then I didn't want to work for that company. And because I had so many other types of jobs before being an engineer, I was a longshoreman, a gardener, a teacher. I knew I could always get a job. So I was willing to be fired, so to speak.
I have a question coming up later about imposter syndrome. And I guess I just want to, before I launch into that, I just want to preempt that by saying that, at least for me personally, I never called it imposter syndrome, but I have never felt ready for any major step I've had in my career, frankly, in my life. And yet I still go ahead and do it. And I feel like that skill or that ability to just kind of go for opportunities when they're in front of me has served me quite well. So I'm just curious if you've had any experiences with this notion of imposter syndrome.
Amen.
And so how did you manage it?
Yeah, look, I was scared. I mean, maybe I don't know a lot of the folks on the line other than you and Chris, so I shouldn't probably be this honest. But I was scared to death every single time I got a new job. I wasn't sure I was going to make it. I was sure I was going to be fired. I knew I was going to be uncomfortable. I hoped I would learn a lot. But I had, just briefly, I had sort of a foundation of faith that said, hey, if God's going to open a door, I better walk through it and see what happens. So I relied on my faith to make it through those times I was so scared. Sometimes I'd be so scared that I couldn't even eat when I started a new job on the first day. But, it worked out.
Yeah, I always tell my graduate students, my Ph.D. students, when they tell me that, I've had a lot of students tell me, look, I'm not ready for an assistant professor job or whatever. And I try to make a joke about it, but I always say something to the effect of, look, if that's the case, the world will find a way to reject you. Don't reject yourself, put yourself out there. And in my field anyway, I mean, we get rejected daily when it comes to papers, when it comes to ideas. So it's like, you know what, you just got to get comfortable with that notion, and to the extent possible, put yourself out there and see what happens.
Rejection is part of success. I got laid off as a high school teacher 3 times in 3 years. I mean, fired every year, not justifiably. When I tried to get a job in aerospace, I applied to 5 of the 6 companies that make up Boeing today, and they all rejected me. The one that hired me rejected me twice before I got in. So dealing with rejection, being persistent, it's a key to success.
Yeah, well said. So you brought up being a teacher. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. So you taught high school math and physics. I'm curious what led you to that particular career track. And then also, how did you go from being a high school math teacher to pursuing doctoral level work?
Yeah, I thought I was called to be a teacher my whole life. I became a teacher in the LA Unified School District at an urban impacted school. I had a heart for the people in that community. And yet there was something called Proposition 13 that lowered the property taxes. So every year the teachers without tenure would be fired, and there's no assurance they'd have a job. I was young, I was married, my wife and I wanted to start a family. She suggested that I needed to change my line of work to something more stable where I wouldn't be unemployed, every year. So I knew I needed to change. My bachelor's degree was in physics, and I wanted to teach. I knew that there were physics professors that were unemployed. I'm sorry for the pounding outside. I knew there were physics professors that were unemployed, but engineering professors were not. So I decided that I would get a Ph.D. in engineering so I could be a university professor, because teaching was in my heart. And so that's why I ended up finding a job that would allow me to go to school while I was working, which is what I did.
And so this is weird coming from an academic, but at what point did you realize academia maybe wasn't what you thought it was and ended up looking at a corporate?
Oh, no, I never came to that realization. I mean, I finished my PhD while I was working. I interviewed for a job at UCLA, actually, in the Bolter Hall. Is there still an engineering camp called Bolter Hall or something like that? I remember I went and gave a seminar there, and they told me, hey, we can talk about hiring you, but there's no way we're giving you tenure to start out. And so at this point, I was married with 2 kids. I had a house, and I wasn't willing to do the same thing I did in high school, which is devote the next 5 years to try and get tenure and then get laid off again. So what I did is because I was working while I was getting my PhD, I just stayed working at what became Boeing. I taught a little bit at night at UC Irvine. My heart is still in teaching. Even to this day, I'm doing teaching. But I realized that I couldn't do a good job teaching and at my engineering job if I did them both. So I stopped teaching at UCI at night after just, like 1 year, and just for the next, 30 years, basically focused on aerospace. And now I'm back teaching again, only I'm teaching, basic math as a volunteer, as opposed to teaching engineering.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about what you're up to post-retirement,
Sure.
For sure. One thing that a lot of our students, I think, have in common with you is that a lot of people pursue their MBA in hopes of making a career switch. And I mean, it was all STEM related, right? But you went from a variety of different jobs, from high school teaching to PhD to CTO. And I'm sure you've come across a lot of people that have pivoted in their career. So I'm curious if you have any particular advice for career switchers.
I think there's nothing better than moving between a variety of fields earlier in your career, because it creates a unique set of capabilities that nobody else in the world has. I mean, and so because you've got this very unique background, you're going to be able to come up with ideas and solutions and products that nobody else can even dream of, because of the thoughts that are crossing through your brain from all these different areas you've been in. I mean, that's the whole diversity story. So I highly applaud the people that are looking at doing pivoting and career changes as part of their MBA program.
Yeah, I always think it's interesting whenever I look at people in my own field. I look at their careers and I very quickly form a narrative for how they did everything they did. And I'm like, wow, that seems so planned and it makes complete sense. And then you actually talk to them, the ones that are honest, and they're like, oh no, man, I've been improvising at every step of the way. Like, it's come together and I'm here now because, all of these things happened, but none of it, there was no master plan. There might've been a rough, I want to be an academic. But how you get there and where you do it, it's like, I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, there's a lot of just serendipity to this stuff. I mean, in my case, in the year before I became the CTO reports to the CEO, 2 CEOs from Boeing were fired. And so if neither of those people had been fired, I probably wouldn't have ended up as the CTO. Who knows? So there's just a lot of serendipity and timing in these things.
Yeah. Switching gears a little bit to talk more directly about diversity and ethnic identity. You identify as a Mexican-American man. I'm just curious what this identity means to you and how it's played out in your life and your career.
So I identify as being Hispanic, not Mexican, because my ancestors never went to Mexico. They came straight from Spain. That's
right. We talked about that earlier.
This is one of the reasons I gave the caveat at the beginning about I'm not an expert in this area. So don't quote me on any of my comments on ethnicity, diversity, et cetera. But I'm very confused by the definitions. I've had friends that are 100% Irish in their blood, because their grandparents were 100% Irish, but they were born in Mexico. My friend was born in Mexico, Mexican citizen, only spoke Spanish, came across the border without papers, but he's 100% Irish, yet he's Mexican, Then you got somebody like me whose grandparents came from Spain, lived in East LA all their life, was part of the Hispanic community. My mother was born, grew up there. Her wedding announcements were in Spanish. My baptism certificate, I think, was in Spanish. Yet I never learned how to speak Spanish because my mother married a North American, and so we never spoke Spanish at home. Yet I still consider myself Hispanic. I identify with the community. I identify with the values. So it's a complicated subject.
Yeah, I mean, to say that identity is complicated, I mean, absolutely. It does seem, though, that, to me as an outsider and having talked to you before and then talking to you now, it seems like a lot of your identity kind of plays out in your actions and your involvement in particular activities while you were still in your career and also now. So can you talk to us a little bit about that, sort of behaviorally, how your background,
I've
been things you work on now?
Sure. Because of the community I related to, I felt like I was part of, I've been working on STEM in the, underrepresented minority community for 30 years. Through working with universities, through outreach to elementary schools and, junior highs and high schools, through sponsoring scholarships for underrepresented minority kids to go into college STEM majors. So it's been part of what my wife and I have been doing for decades. And the reason is because historically, groups that have been historically underrepresented in worse than that, much worse than that, is they're not given a vision. Young people aren't given a vision that they can move into these jobs because they don't have a lot of relatives that can say to them, you can do this. They don't even know it's an option. So we focused a lot on making sure that young people in the underrepresented minority communities know that they can do this work. They can get great jobs. They can get jobs that can change their life and their family's life for decades to come, and they can do it if they're given the proper support. So pretty much that's been my mission for the 3 decades, and it remains my mission today.
Yeah, that's one thing that I'm a first generation college student myself. I'm the second person with a high school diploma in my family, first one to go to college. Something that to me was always very, I guess, frustrating when I was younger is that I never knew the steps to, like when I was really young, I didn't really know the steps to get into college. Once I was there, it was like, oh, you can go to school beyond undergrad? Like, what is that about? And I never had ready access to people who had worked as lawyers, who had worked as, businessmen and women, who had been academics. And so it was always that extra labor to try to demystify what that was. And I found that was incredibly frustrating. And now, one lesson for me has been, whenever I get the chance, I love talking about what my job actually is, what it takes to be an academic at a place like UCLA, what it means to do research in my field, what it means to get tenure, and sort of try to put it in ways that are simple to understand. It does nobody any good for me to kind of sit here and try to obscure the nuts and bolts aspects of my job. So that's something that I always try to.
Yeah. I only went to Hispanic serving institutions for my post-high school. High school, bachelor's degree, master's degree, Ph.D., they were all Hispanic serving institutions. And I'm convinced that the reason that there are not a lot of Hispanic people in science and technology at these things is because there's been nobody to tell the people before they got there that this is for them and that they can make it. And that's why professional organizations like SHIP, Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, NSBE, National Society of Black Engineers, are so important, because there's a cohort of people that you feel comfortable with, that you can see are making it, right? So the most important thing is whether it's in business or our own nephews, our own neighbors, our nieces, whatever, and just letting them know who you are and what you're doing. Tell a kid what it's like to get an MBA. They might not even know you could do that. And that one little thing can put a seed in some young person's mind that for you, it took you 2 minutes. For them, it dramatically changes the course of their life and their family's life for decades to come.
Thanks for sharing that. It seems like a lot of your career, and certainly now your life post-retirement, it seems like teaching has played a huge role, and sort of giving to others has played a huge role. I'm curious if you can just tell us a little bit about sort of why that is. What about teaching appeals to you? And also what about giving of yourself in these ways is appealing to you?
Hey, look, I think there are so many people out there that could have, I don't know what your definition of success is, but the world defines success a lot of times with making a lot of money, having a good job title. Of course, we broaden it out to saying, hey, making an impact on the world, helping others, et cetera. But whatever your definition is, I think there are so many people out there that could be greatly successful if they were just pointed in the right direction and given a little help. And I feel so guilty that I know there are all those people out there and there's nobody helping point them in the right direction. Yet there are a small percentage of people, maybe in the local community that go to some rich school that have doctors and lawyers as their parents. They get all the breaks, all how to be helping the talent in their area. And I lived right next to a medical school. And so I was always playing tennis with these young people that were, in residency. So one guy played tennis with a young guy. He was a brain surgeon. He was finishing his 7th year of his training as a brain surgeon. Now, we used to say brain surgeons, those are like the best there is. So I said to him, what made you think you could be a brain surgeon? He says, well, my brother was an orthopedic surgeon. And he was just my brother, so I knew it was possible. And he told me it wasn't that hard. I said, well, what made your brother think that he could be an orthopedic surgeon? And he says, well, our dad was a radiologist, and he's our dad. And, he didn't know what he was doing half the time. And so my brother knew he could do it. And I said, okay, so you had these two people that sort of showed you the way. I said, you and I, we're going to drive down to the south side of Chicago and the west side of Chicago, which is where there's like 60 shootings a night, literally that many shootings. And I said, we're going to look at one of these young kids, and we're going to calculate the percentage of one of them becoming a brain surgeon. And it's going to be infinitesimally small, not because you're any smarter than this kid, but because, you're not, it's not that you're a genius and everybody else is stupid. It's that you grew up in a way that you saw what your life could be, and there were people around to help you. And so because there's so many people out there that don't have somebody to give them a vision, help them, I just feel compelled that that's all of our response for those of us who have been blessed to be successful and to make it to the Anderson School of Business. I mean, whether you consider yourself successful yet or not, you're successful. And so I think you're already obligated to share that success with the people that have not been as successful as you, and tell them the path that you've been on and inspire them with your stories. My story is over. Nobody cares about me. I'm an old man. But you people are the young ones that are going to walk out into your own communities and change hundreds of people's lives just by letting people know who you are.
It's funny. I think you inadvertently hit on one of the core values of the Anderson School, which is sharing success. If not, we did a masterful job making sure that got weaved into what you're talking about today. So thanks for sharing that. One thing I found really interesting in terms of just ascending in my own career is at some point it's diminishing returns on sort of deriving pleasure from your own success. It's like at some point it's like, well, I've achieved a certain amount where I feel relatively stable, relatively safe. So what's next? And I think for me, anyway, this hit me when I was probably in my late 20s, early 30s. It was like, I need to figure out a way to take everything I've learned and figure out a way to actually put that back out there in the world. Unclear exactly what's going to happen or who's going to benefit, but that sort of focus on the self gets old. And it's not very fulfilling after a certain point. That's at least been my experience coming up in my job, in my career.
There's a lot of rich people that are not happy. And so it's true that part of success in the world's term does give you more money. One aspect of it gives you more money. And so you're able to do things that others can't do. But that's not the true source of long-term happiness and fulfillment. One of the things about that book I told you, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, is one of the principles is called begin with the end in mind. And there's actually an exercise that you do in this class where you sit down in a dark room or slightly dark room and you write your own obituary as you would. I mean, that sounds morbid, of course, but you write your own obituary as you would want to be remembered. And I'm telling you, I can't imagine that any of you on the line in your obituary are going to have one of the most important things is I died as one of the richest people in the world. It's going to be about stuff much different than that. I mean,
right.
Much different.
Or he got promoted a lot of times. It's like, yeah, that's great, but
it's exciting when it happens. And I'm not going to say it's not fun to do that. But that's not, in the end, what really counts.
Earlier, you mentioned that now you're teaching basic math. I'm wondering if you could tell us specifically in what context you're teaching this. I know we talked about this last time, but John, are you there? I think we might be having lag issues.
Yeah, it looks like he's frozen on my end as well. So
he might be frozen.
Yeah.
Since I have you on the line, Camilo, how are we doing on time?
We're doing great. We've got about 20 minutes left. And so far, I'm really loving the the conversational tone. So that's been amazing. Lots of good gems and personal insights. So that's always really nice.
I mean, John is frozen now, so that might be hard to have a conversation if he's frozen.
Well, I'm John 1.0.
There you go.
Yeah.
This is life in the Zoom world, man.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
I think he's probably logging off and trying to log back on.
Yeah.
When he comes back, why don't we go ahead and maybe take some questions from everybody on the call, if there are any.
Okay. That's also a prompt for everyone on the call to maybe think of a few questions before he comes on. Yeah. Maybe in the interim, I think it'd be great if maybe we could put like some music on or just, Sorry to just throw that out there.
Yeah, who's the DJ?
Well, it's been interesting. We actually had like one of the kind of committee members curated a playlist for us. Ashley Johnson, first year. So that was really nice of her.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Am I back?
You're back.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. The internet went down, so I called in through my phone. So we'll see how this goes.
Okay. You also changed your name, so that's interesting.
Yeah,
this was happening earlier. I'm honored to be considered as Chris Lowe.
There we go. Yeah, we love that.
By the way, he's the first person I ever knew that realized the power of big data and got a graduate degree in big data. So he figured it out first. He's been my role model for understanding data analytics and big data. Love it.
Man, that is quite the endorsement. Put that on Chris's LinkedIn.
He's gonna have it on his resume that he just puts over and carries around with him everywhere.
Exactly.
Old school LinkedIn.
old school, man. That's how we did it in the 90s. All right. Anybody have any questions or thoughts for John, since we're all on the call? And this has been a rather conversational panel here. But any questions from the crowd?
Yeah, we got Ben Antoine. Ben, the floor is yours.
Hey, John, nice to see you, man. How you doing?
Hi, Ben. How are you doing?
Yeah,
I didn't realize you were on there. Nice to see you.
Another Boeing alum here, and just even when you spoke about Chris and just the family.
Hey, man.
Both you and Wanda, have been instrumental and great mentors to me. Even in my tenure at Boeing, and I think I caught you towards the tail end of it. Actually, I think it was 2016. I think you retired.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was great.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, I had forgotten that you were in this class.
I'm here. But yeah, like speaking of which, the question I had for you, John, I know earlier on in your talk, you mentioned kind of always being on the edge of your seat, not knowing when, on any given day you can be fired. I guess how did you go about your day to day, or what was your mantra that kept you going? Because I can imagine that can also be a stressful situation and kind of never know if you're going to be have that seat going forward. So what was your advice for that?
If you think about it too much, it'll kill you. If you're a baseball player and you realize that if you go out and strike out every time and that they're going to stop paying you whenever they pay baseball players $20 million a year, you'd be paralyzed. So you just can't think about it, and you just got to go and make things happen. And you know that other people are counting on you. So you just do what you got to do. Now, when you retire, you don't even realize how much stress you're under till it's over and it stops. And then 2 or 3 months later, you say, man, my blood pressure dropped a whole bunch. I've lost weight, I must have been under stress. But when it's happening, it's just part of life and you just deal with it. You don't think about it too much.
Fair enough. I like it. Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Good to see you, Ben.
Michael.
Up next, we have Liz Perez.
John, thank you so much for your time. You mentioned a lot in your conversation, like serendipity playing a huge role in your career, and thinking about moments where like maybe I hope folks can relate when you feel really lucky in your career or very unlucky. And so my question to you is kind of thinking about the moments in your career where you felt unlucky. How did you kind of work through that, and how did you kind of like move away for that or work through it?
The times that there have been failures, have been the ones that have been followed by the times of greatest, acceleration, personal failures. I remember one time I had a program I was managing to build something for the FAA, a test fixture. And the CTO, who was like 5 levels above me at the time, for some reason wanted to review the program. And it had overrun, in the Boeing culture, you never overrun a program on budget. And so I said to him, sir, if it overruns again, please fire me. I don't deserve to work here. And you can guess what happened. It overran again, but he didn't fire me. So that was one of the scariest days, I guess, when I regretted saying what I said, but I don't know. What do you think, Liz? What's your take on that subject?
Well, I used to have a mentor who always used to say, like, you make your luck. And like, but I've also felt in different stages of my career, like I got really lucky there. But then there's been moments where I have felt unlucky. And like, I honestly just like leaning on my, like the sponsors or the support network I've had professionally has always been my go-to and figuring out what next steps, but always curious to hear what that looks like or what that might look like as I make mistakes.
Look, over the long term, your successes and failures all work together to make you the person you are, which is to build your success. Over the short term, when you have a failure, you need that network of people, of mentors, sponsors, friends, family, to fall back on when you're feeling like you can't go on anymore. You need their encouragement and support to make it through the next day. But over the long term, those things that make you feel the worst are what you look at as saying, man, that was a critical. There was one time where I wasn't sure I was going to survive early in my career, where I was working for a guy that had a serious substance abuse problem. I mean, you think of the worst kind you can dream of, that's what he had. And for 2 years, I literally wasn't sure I was going to survive, not just get fired, I mean survive. And yet I look back at that now and said that was one of the most important times in my life that I learned what the word resilience meant, And so over the long range, you should be happy with those failures because they make you who you are. Over the short range, you need a team of people around you to make sure that you make the right decisions when you're in the fire.
Thanks. That really resonates. Thank you.
Yeah, I see Kevin, you've had your hand up for a little while.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, John, for being with us today. I had a question about, you mentioned like giving back and, especially for, younger people and children, students who, maybe don't see the opportunities that, people who are in more privileged spaces get to see. How do how would you advise like going about that, wanting to make that impact? But a lot of times, those people aren't naturally the people that are already in our circles. So how do you
it's not easy at times to find places to help. It took me 2 years to find the main program I'm working with now. Now I work with a program called Taller San Jose, which St. Joseph's Workshop. Jesus was a carpenter, his father was a carpenter, so Jesus learned how to be a carpenter in his father's workshop. So the program I'm working with today that took me 2 years to find takes young people, 18 to 28, that have either gone to prison and are on probation or have gotten out of, serious drug rehab like heroin. And we teach them to be construction workers, carpenters, electricians, et cetera. So I teach them basic math. You can't be a carpenter unless you can add and subtract fractions. So I'm the king of teaching fractions to people that didn't pay attention when they were in elementary school. But it took me 2 years of looking for places to volunteer before I found a place that I thought I could help and that wanted my help. So don't expect to snap your fingers and say, hey, I was the CTO of a big company. You'd think a lot of people would want my help. They don't care. They are so busy working on the front lines with the real people that need help. They don't have time to read your LinkedIn profile. You've got to find a way to kind of force yourself in to these situations in places where the people aren't impressed by your background. It's a different world. And so you got to find a way to fit it. So I promise you, if it's in your heart to help, you will find places or people that need your help. You won't just be out there and ready, and it'll happen for you. It might take a little bit, but just keep going. You'll do well.
Yeah, and if I can put in a little plug, the Reardon programs are always looking for talented MBAs like yourself, Kevin, to help out first generation high school, college, and post-college. I call them kids, but these are young adults. All either trying to get to college or not trying to get to business school. So we're always looking for folks to come in, speak, do model lectures, that kind of stuff. So just putting that out there. I gotta put a plug in.
You shouldn't underestimate your own importance and impact. Don't say, I need to wait till I've accomplished something to try and influence people. You've already accomplished an unbelievable amount. And so just be out there and be yourself and let people know who you are and what you're doing. And you'll be inspiring people and you won't even know you're doing it. Getting into a formal program is, that's fantastic too. That's above and beyond just being yourself, being out there and having a heart of wanting to help. That's the most important thing.
Heather, you have your hand up. Dean Caruso, I should say.
Thank you. And thank you, John, for just a wonderful talk and for sharing your experience and your insights. So many things that you said, I think are valuable guidance for all of us. One of the things that in particular I'm struck by, when you talk about wanting to make a name for yourself in terms of just doing good work, being known for excellence. We just had a speaker who talked about sort of knowing what your superpower is. And I think your take on this is different in an important way and shows a sort of a breadth of ways that people can approach their careers. And I think, you're talking about demonstrating in the way that you approach your work, the way that you craft your career, the kind of person you are, and the people and the organizations that want you are going to get you, and they're going to grab you, and they're going to keep you, or they're going to lose you, and that's their loss. But I know a lot of people, I've seen this, I'm sure you've seen this, they do the work. And because of various biases or stereotypes, they aren't quite seen. The work is happening, but they're not being appreciated for all of it. And I wonder if you have any experiences or stories that you can share with us about times when you have seen someone overturn that problem for themselves, when they've gone from being unseen to being able to be recognized. What happens? How does that work in your experience?
Well, again, Dean, I don't know if you were there at the beginning when I gave my caveats of saying I'm not an expert in this area, so I might be violating fundamental principles here. I don't know. I'm just telling you what I believe. Look, it happened to me personally, where I thought my work was being misunderstood, underappreciated. At one point, a person actually thought that I was trying to undermine him, my boss's boss. And so I got to the point where I did what I fired my boss. If I can't succeed in that organization, that's an organization I don't want to be any part of. And I believed that I could do good enough work that it would be appreciated somewhere. But my fundamental belief was that I wanted, when people looked at me, let me give you an example. And again, this probably violates some fundamental principle, but my wife happens to be an Asian American. My wife is Asian American. We've been married for almost 50 years. when I look at her, when I talk to her, the first thought that comes to my mind is not that she's an Asian American. And when she looks at me, I think she said the first thought that comes to her mind is probably something like, why didn't you take out the trash? Or how can you say something so stupid, right? So we see each other in a way where those other characteristics that people look at externally are known and important, but they're lower on the list of importance in the interaction between us than the things that are primary importance at the time. My goal was always to make sure that no matter who saw me, no matter what they thought of my background, I actually had the CEO say to me once, you and I come from really different places. And this was not meant as a compliment, right? He did not like my background. He did not think that my background was really appropriate, but the point was, I convinced myself he needs me for what I can do technically for him. And so that principle was with me from day one. No matter what they think of me, they're going to need me because I'm going to make sure I'm the best there is in this particular area. You can like me, you can not like me, you can, think whatever you want about people that look like me or don't look like me, doesn't matter. So that was my approach, right or wrong. I know that might not work for everybody, but that's what I did.
I really appreciate that. I know we talk in various venues to our students about the importance of sort of owning who you are and the authenticity and learning to satisfy yourself first.
And you fire your boss. Before you fire your boss, you get help from your friends to say, hey, look, I can't figure out why this person is discriminating against me, or maybe I know why they're discriminating, but I don't know how to handle it. You seem to have been able to handle it. That's why we had at Boeing, we called them affinity groups, where there was a Hispanic affinity group, African American affinity group, where people that had faced the same kinds of challenge could get together in a safe place and share how they had dealt with them. And so you should always do that first. But if you get to the point where you can't make progress with a particular leader because of discriminating against you, you fire them and you go work in a different part of the organization or a different part of the company. This is a very competitive world and people need you. And the better you are, the more they need you.
Well said. Thank you.
I think that's a great way to end it. The idea that having confidence in yourself and realizing that people are going to need you, I think is an important lesson to take away from this. So I want to thank John Tracy. Thank you for giving us so much of your time, for calling in all the way from the Hawaiian Islands. We really appreciate this and for being part of our Equity Summit at Anderson. I don't see him on the call, but I want to thank Chris Lowe, who has been working tirelessly to bring in guest speakers to the Anderson School. Chris is, you all know him. He's a first-year student, and he has impressed so many of us already. So I just want to thank him very publicly. And I know John is completely behind me on that one. All right, Camilo and Jesse, I'll turn it back over to you guys.
Thanks, Miguel.
Awesome. Thank you very much. We really appreciate both of your time and candor during that conversation. We'll be transitioning over towards the networking session. And thank you all for being here. It's been a long day, and thank you so much. I don't know if Jesse or Courtney, if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I can jump in for a few quick remarks since I know we're all running on schedule and it's also a Friday, and I don't want to stand between you and your post-Friday plans. Just want to say thank you to everyone who helped make this possible. Thank you, Dean Unzueta. Thank you, Dean Caruso. Thank you, Camilo, for being part of this. Of course, thank you, John Tracy, from zooming in from Hawaii. I can't say I would have done the same in your situation, but I'm just so grateful to finally see this entire event come to fruition after months and months of planning. And there was a few tech issues earlier in the day, but it just gave the summit a whole lot more character, because I think that's what this entire summit was really about, was speaking about our differences and how we're all able to climb through them or use them as our own superpowers. So once again, thank you all. And if you have some spare time, we're about to jump into some networking rooms. And of course, John Tracy, Dean Unzueta, Dean Caruso, you're all welcome to coming out with us.